Okay, let's take a look at some design and development tips that you can follow when creating an XML format. To begin with, create the requirement summary that you're trying to implement because this helps you ferret out the tags and the attributes that you're going to need. And what you'll find is when you write things down, nouns will typically become tags and adjectives will typically become attributes, although they may become tags themselves if they're somewhat complex. And verbs will typically become functions. Once you've done that, you can identify the base tags. Now, these are tags that will serve as containers and wrappers for other tags. And the reason you want to do this is because this ensures that you get all of your collection tags in place first. So in the previous example, we would have things like maybe tables or rooms encompassing things like the living room or bedroom sections of the furniture order. Once you've done that, you define the tags that are going to make up the bulk of the data. These are your base level objects. These are the things like the sofas and tables that we saw in the furniture example in the previous lesson. And once you've done that, if you feel up to it, you can create the associated schema or DTD. And in fact, you should probably create the schema or DTD in parallel with your XML data, or maybe even beforehand. And that's another tip that we'll look at in a minute. Now, we're not going to do that in this title because that's relatively involved and we want to get straight to the data. So we're going to skip that part. And then once you've created the data, you can go ahead and write the associated style sheet or CSS or script that goes along with your data. One of the common questions that people who are designing XML tag sets come across is, when should I choose between using tags and using attributes? And the short answer is there's really no hard and fast rule. You need to use your better judgment, but there are some guiding principles you can follow. Typically, you should prefer tags when you have to represent data that's relatively complex or data that can be broken down into multiple parts. And you should use attributes as modifiers for data or containers for simple data. Now, another guiding principle that you should follow on top of that is, if data is suitable for an attribute, but it could end up as multiple attributes on the same element, then you should probably use child tags instead. So let's take a look at an example. Here I have an XML fragment that defines a movie, and you can imagine that this XML fragment is used in an XML data set for, say, a video rental store. So here we have a tag that defines movie, and there's an attribute in stock, and that can either be true or false. So in this case, in stock is clearly an attribute. Why? Because it describes a property of the movie. So this is an adjective, and it describes whether the movie is in or out of stock. Now, a movie can either be in stock or out of stock. There's no chance of in stock appearing more than once on the movie tag. It's a relatively simple attribute. Although consider a case of something like title. Now, you might be wondering, why isn't title an attribute? And the reason is because sometimes movies have different titles in different languages. So although I could have solved this problem by putting something like title-US equals movie title and title-FR equals the French version, that kind of defeats the purpose of using child tags. What I'm doing here is I'm using the base tag title and then decorating that with a language attribute that describes which language that title is. Same idea with price. I could have placed price on the movie as an attribute, and in fact, if I only sold the movie in the United States, I might just do that. However, if you sell your products in multiple countries for multiple different pricing units, or if you have prices that reflect discounts, that might not be such a great idea. So follow these principles, and you'll usually end up at the right conclusion. You'll probably find out pretty quickly if you didn't. But in essence, use tags for complex data, use attributes for simple data, and modifiers for data. And remember that if an attribute could possibly be used more than once, then break it up into a child tag. We talked about this a little bit beforehand. You should create your schema or your document type definition, or DTD, before or maybe during your design process, not at the end. And this is assuming that you're even going to do this. And the reason for this is because it removes the temptation to try to retrofit the rules of the schema to fit your data instead of designing the data correctly right up front. Now, if you follow this process, you'll catch design errors sooner if you think about your schema beforehand. And if you do this, you can also do data testing and validation in parallel with the development process. Like I said, we're not going to do this in this example because it's pretty involved and we want to keep this a little bit higher level and instructional. Okay, so we've reached the point now where we are ready to go ahead and start designing our tag set. So let's do that in the next lesson.